In English, the sound z is a little over 33% more common than the sound v. That's in speech overall, not in vocabulary. But the letter z used to spell it is over 12 times less common than the letter v. Why is this? Well, obviously you know why this is. It's because most of the time z is spelt using the letter s. That's not the question we're answering. The question we're answering now is why z is usually spelt with an s. This was originally meant to be part of the last linguistics video, but it outgrew that. This video is too important for them because its answer comes from three sources, the three pools that English drew its vocabulary from, starting with native English words. So English used to be Proto-Indo-European, which had no fricatives except s. It only has three plosives. So this question is about correspondences, the ultimate destination of the sounds in Proto-Indo-European. In English, there are four ways the fricatives were produced. Number one, Grimm's Law. Like I said, this is the one law you need to know about Proto-Germanic. P turned into B turned into P, and P turned into F. Now, sa, on the other hand, was in the language from the beginning, but z emerged from number two, Werner's law. When preceded by a short, unstressed vowel, and usually at the end of a word, sa becomes z. F also becomes v, except at this point in the language, v is actually the same as b. It's not until number three, fricative hardening, that v, which is how you pronounce b when it's in the middle of a word, turns back into v. And f, which is actually f at this point, finally turns into f. That leaves number four, the Germanic spirant law, which actually happened before Grimm's law. It states that all the plosives become p and ultimately f when in front of t or sa. Now, given all of that, you would expect to see the exact opposite, with z getting its own letter and v having to share a letter with b. But there are two more sound changes that affected things. Number five, rhoticization. Remember when I corrected my pronunciation of f? Well, it turns out I also have to correct sa, because it was actually sa. While this might not seem like a big difference, it means instead of voicing to z, it voices to za, which is closer to r than z, which is what it turns into, or disappears when it's at the end of a word. Z no longer exists in Germanic. And finally, number six, voicing of intervocalic fricatives. Once sa corrected to sa and fa hardened to fa, they picked up a new source of voicing, in being between two vowels. We can see a lot of examples of this nowadays in leaf leaves, house houses, and mouth mouths. This rule was productive for all of Old English, and even when it ended, the spelling convention was for fa and va and sa and za to be spelt using the same letter. In the original runic alphabet, they don't even have separate letters available, so why is va spelled with a v now? Well, that brings us to our second source of vocabulary, French loanwords. As hard as we try, Latin remains different from English. It used to be the same back in Proto-Indo-European, but the journey was difficult and different. It also had some rules for defining the reflexes, starting with number one, which doesn't have a cool name, turns Proto-Indo-Europeans' aspirated plosives into fricatives. That means p into va, da into the, and ga into ra. These would later be revised to f, th, and h, which would further be revised to just f and h. Number two, whoop-de-doo, it's rhoticization again. Sa voices to z between two vowels and then turns into ra. But we're not really talking about Latin, English parts from French. That's why this section is called French loanwords. So what happened in French? Well, first off, they fixed the sa to actually say sa, but number three is the first lenition, which affected all of the consonants. This you might recognize if you know much about Spanish. Voiceless consonants become voiced consonants, and double voiceless consonants become voiceless. What of the voiced consonants? Well, they became the, and instead of floundering around as the, it skipped straight to ya. And then number four, that happened again. So we ended up with chèvre, derived from caper. Now, French borrowed a lot of words directly from Latin, so they ended up with pupitre from pulpitum, and we can't forget to mention number five, W turned into V. The Latin letter V, which should be a dead giveaway, made a W sound in Latin, quickly switching to making a V sound after the Roman Empire fell. Hence how we got Spanish verga from Latin virga, which is also an example of rhoticization. But that's V. What was Z up to? Honestly, not much. Z was introduced as its own unique phoneme, but it was a long road and few of them actually made it. But this is the way, so when E and E are in front of T and K and behind another vowel, they turn into Y, and Y also existed in Latin. These go ahead into Tsya and Tsya. Later on, this merges with Ch from soft C. Now, if this occurs in between two vowels, the first lenition changes it into Dzya, where it can spit out the sound Y, and finally Z reaches its final place as Z. So, to answer our initial question, as usual, orthography strives to reflect the paths rather than purely the outcomes, so we get different letters describing the same sounds purely based on their history and a complicated preservation tactic. Now, as we just discussed, English didn't have any of that history, so when the time came, letters were basically assigned randomly, so we got rise and size. That being said, Generally, native English words used a Z, while French words retain their spelling. And the best answer really is that, the vast majority of words containing Z are either third person verbs or plural nouns, which can also be sa. So, yeah, they use the letter that can be both. So the question is answered, but this graph is looking kind of empty, so I'm going to go ahead and fill it up anyways. That's why the third section is other foreign languages. So, as anyone should know, the Latin letter Z is originally from the Greek letter zeta. Now, zeta originally comes from dia and gya and sometimes ya, but ya sometimes gave up and became ha, as the was also involved, making it fully independent from sigma. Well, not entirely. For fa, on the other hand, instead of inventing fricatives, Greek took the novel approach of preserving three sets of plosives. Well, until now. Now they have phi. And you may think Greek doesn't have va just looking at the alphabet, but you'd be wrong. Beta is actually pronounced vita, because ba dropped into va, and wa also turned into va. Actually, most of the time wa disappeared, but when it's after a vowel, we get va as in psev, though. Note that it would be fa if it were voiceless. So Latin borrowed it mostly for place names. Obviously, z didn't enter Latin, so most of the time people pronounced it sa, but it was still kept in mind how to pronounce. That's why in Spanish, when sa was voiced as za, it was written with a z. Nowadays, both of them turned into tha, which also voices sometimes independent of which letter is used to write it, unless you're in Latin America, in which case it's a homograph of sa. Fa is from Latin fa, and va doesn't exist unless you count va, which is the same thing as ba. German uses z for tsa, which is ultimately from ta, from pie da. Sa, za, and fa are from the same sources as English, and va is derived from wa. That leaves the Slavic languages, which, in a shocking reversal, za is from da and also ta, and independent from sa, from ta and sa. But fa only occurs as a devoiced equivalent of va, from Proto-European wa, despite what you hear. And in Finnish, they don't use the letter Z and don't have a Z sound, and also it's not an Indo European language. Hey guys, remember when I said I was submitting charivaris for the Cursed Conlang Circus? Well, I need an artist to draw some stuff for it. If you know anyone good, get me in touch.